All right, so I am going to continue with demonstrating how I create my black text layers as vectors. So far, this is what I have. And I was right in the middle of just modifying this type. And the type that I had downloaded has an ampersand. And so I'm using that ampersand, but I now want to customize it a little bit. So I find it, I select it, and besides just using the large selection tool and being able to squeeze it and rotate it, which works, I know I want this edge of the ampersand to be flat, like the Y there. In fact, I think I want the Y to maybe come out a little bit. So there's just lots of little things. So to do that, I can go to Object, Transform, and use shear. This is like a warp or a distort in Photoshop. The thing about shear, though, is you want to make sure that preview is turned on. Otherwise, you won't see what your settings are doing. And by shearing, you can play with a lot of different aspects of it that don't really make any intuitive sense, at least not to me. So if I say horizontal axis and then the angle like that, it does stuff, but not always stuff you fully understand. And then vertical, it does stuff, but not always stuff you fully understand. But it's this angle that really changes it a lot, right? And so that can help me kind of align it. And then I say, okay. And then I can squeeze it. And I can squeeze it. And I can squeeze it. And I think that's about the right size. And then I can always, because it's an outlined vector, I can always redraw. And for this, I'm actually going to kind of flatten out that tail. Right? And then flatten it out here. Much like I did with the Y, kind of making my own shape. I kind of want to flatten it out here, just mess it up a little bit. Round that out. And with the pencil tool, my favorite tool, just remember you have to end on the path, start on the path and end on the path in order for it to be like the magic scissors. So you have to see the anchor points and then you can modify them. All right, now I get to go through all of that again for the text on the bottom. But before I move to the bottom, I want to make sure I like how that's all spacing out. And the only thing I notice is that the Y, I think I want it to be a little bit more spaced from that T. So I can select just the Y, unlock it. I lock each layer as I work on it so it doesn't get confused. I'm going to stretch it a little bit. Because you're not only looking at the details, even though it's really, really tempting, you're also trying to look at the big picture as you go. That allows me to stretch this a little bit as well. I'm trying to get that kind of blocking of the text. Now the other tools you have to customize, like for the Y, if I want to fill in some of these gaps, I can just use the blob brush. If I want to create some of these extra openings, I can use the eraser. As long as I have the Y unlocked. And if I want to get rid of these, I'm figuring the little debris I'll do without, because I can always add that into a background texture if I want to. So many little customized type choices you get to make. Now, where did I spend most of my time? And where do I suggest you spend most of your time? On the first letter of a phrase of type and on the last letter. And now that I have that whole phrase finished, I want to turn off the sketch and just look at it and then revisit any letters I think are a little off. So my first letter, my A, I think I'm going to transform and reflect a little bit. Oh, not reflect, sorry. Transform and shear a little bit, right? And just slightly I want to play with those angles, right? So that feels a little bit more vertical. And then see if I like that better. Right? That, yeah, I think that looks a little bit better. So despite whatever my sketch was, you want to be able to evaluate your type on its own. Then I might just squeeze it down a tiny bit. And then I might want to move my B back a little. You can use the arrow keys on your keyboard to really control the kerning, the space between the letters. Yeah, I think that's all pretty readable. Okay, good. So now I'm done with that. Now I move on to the bottom. Hopefully that's just a glitch that it's showing. Yes, indeed. Okay. So same thing. I work letter by letter. Help it to do its thing. But now I have a few different tools that can help, like transform and shear. As long as I preview on, that can help me. There we go. And then, of course, I've got the pencil tool as well. And I can squeeze and I can rotate using the large selection tool. My A wants to be tall so that it's kind of mimicking the space around the bird, the nighthawk. Okay, now pencil. Now I'm going to use my tablet and my stylus, and I get to redraw. I have it set for my pencil tool to be fairly accurate. So I get to redraw these edges. And really just kind of go for it. In sections here. So notice all those little holes as I redraw them. Whoops, they reverse themselves. They become shapes. Now, if I wanted this to look really clean, I could just take that A and reverse it, right? I'm going to use the same type in multiple places, but I want this solution, because I'm imitating letterpress, to feel more hand done. It's just whatever type solution works for your illustration, for the art piece you want to create. And this is very helpful for t-shirts. This is very helpful for a promotional design. Again, every digital artist should know a little bit about how to design type. Otherwise, you're just always going to have people doing it for you, and you might not like their decisions. Okay, that's working. Just going to bring this down more. Angle it. Bring this up a little further from the S. Whoops. Yeah, the biggest frustration I have with Illustrator is just when I'm not exactly hitting the anchors in the way the program wants. And not everyone has that trouble, but I certainly do. Yeah, again. So that's why I find it really helpful to lock other layers so I'm not impacting anything I don't mean to be impacting. And again, with the pencil tool, you just have to start on the path and end on the path. Third time's the charm. There we go. Sometimes you have to zoom in a little bit to get it. Okay, now to fill in some of these gaps, I'm going to use the blob brush. All of these familiar tools, because as I stretched that A, those gaps became a little intense. Especially this one. And I'm not trying to get too hung up on the details. And then I can use my eraser and trim it up a little and get rid of these. Okay, good. Lock it. Next. So I spend the most time on that first letter. And instead of going through all the steps of shear and everything, I'm just going to kind of redraw this one. To be closer to what I want. Now, hand lettering and customized lettering is great, but you also have to make sure it's readable. So that has a lot to do with the space around the letters as much as it has to do with the shape of the letters themselves. So I can get pretty funky with my S, but if it's too close to the A there, if the kerning isn't generous enough, it's going to all kind of bleed together. So I might love this S, but for the good of the type, I want to trim that kerning, that space between. I think of it like each letter is taking a bath in a glass of water, and I want the same amount of water to be in each cup.